How do we implement performance-based hiring at my company? Do not approve a requisition unless it's written with a series of performance objectives. And the question starts as, what does this person need to do to be considered successful? Have a minimum of 4 or 5 performance objectives, KPOs, key performance objectives, that define the task, the action, the result, and some metric of success.
Hey there, senior leader, and welcome to the Talent Sherpa podcast, where senior leaders come to think and rethink how human capital really works. And I want to welcome everyone to episode 100. I'm your host, Jackson Lynch, and I'm joined today by Scott Morris, former CHRO, former pilot, spiritual guru, and the founder of Propulsion AI. And today, we're going to get into something that sits right at the heart of execution, culture, and leadership credibility. We are talking about trust and specifically how to hire for it. Now, most companies say that trust matters, but when they run interviews, they only evaluate skills and polish. They focus on what candidates have rather than how they operate. And when you hire that way, you get predictably unpredictable results. Our guest today has spent over 50 years studying the difference between people who elevate an organization and the people leaders end up managing around. His name is Lou Adler. He needs no introduction, but he has examined thousands of hires across roles, industries, eras, and he keeps seeing the same 12 behavioral traits in every top performer. And the wild part is this: those traits might also be the strongest predictors of trust on a team. So settle in, because this conversation is going to give you a practical roadmap for hiring people who make the company better the moment they walk in the door.
You know, Jackson, I still can't believe that Lou agreed to come on with us. Lou started me in recruiting. His methodologies have filled everything that I've done. I'm really excited to have this conversation. But before we dive in, do us a favor. If you are enjoying this pod and the content that we create, please hit the subscribe button right now. Leave us a comment or drop us a quick review on your preferred platform. That's how not only we keep the pod sharp, but it's how we grow it. It's how you help share it with others. And check out the CHRO Chronicles. They are now available at mytalentsherpa.com. It's a weekly newsletter written by CHROs for CHROs, and it arrives weekly in your inbox. I think, Jackson, I'm right on this. There's been a really overwhelming response so far. So if you're ready to level up your impact, you can do it only $30 a month.
Now, let's dive into the state of play here, Scott. Recruiting feels like it's broken in many companies, many that I've been a part of, and some leaders don't even realize it yet. A recent candidate in the market, I can attest that it feels that way for talent looking for their best fit. On the surface, things look fine. Roles are posted, candidates apply, AI screens resumes faster than humans ever could. Time to fill looks acceptable if that's a good measure for you. Dashboards, they're green, the machinery is running, but underneath, the system is misaligned with how work and workers actually operate now.
And that's because there's been a redistribution effectively of the work. We've entered an agentic workforce era. High performers don't wait anymore to be processed. They evaluate employers the same way that employers are evaluating them, and they move laterally. They build portfolios, they consult, they functionalize, they learn continuously. They are not looking for permission. They're looking for leverage, they're looking for meaning, they're looking for momentum. And a lot of recruiting systems, I think it's the honest truth, are still built for compliance. They're not built for choice.
Yeah, and AI didn't break recruiting. It did expose it. When AI is layered into weak role definitions, shallow intake conversations, backwards looking job descriptions, all it does is accelerate bad decisions. Faster screening of the wrong criteria does not improve outcomes. It just multiplies error.
That is the real fracture point, I think, for certain. Most companies are still recruiting for a static experience in a dynamic environment. They are searching for keywords, which gets blamed a lot on artificial intelligence. It's not. Same technology we've had for a lot of years, but screening for keywords isn't addressing the fact that the work is changing faster than resumes can capture. The systems that we have are optimizing funnels while they are ignoring clarity about candidates. And I honestly think they are confusing efficiency with effectiveness. And meanwhile, the best candidates are not in funnels at all because they are completely managing around the system.
So today we're going to take a really hard look at the state of recruiting with our guest, Lou Adler. Lou has been one of the most influential voices in modern recruiting because he challenged how hiring system actually works. Then he rebuilt it around performance, and he doesn't really need an introduction, but we're giving him one anyway. He began as an engineer and a manager, not as an HR academic. And since that's my background, I'm excited to talk to another of a very, very limited group. I just want to say how happy we are to have you join us today, Lou.
Great, thank you. I'm excited to be here and challenge the thinking of the HR industry in general and maybe globally in particular.
Lou, your performance-based hiring, which was a method, and there are probably the majority of people who already recognize this. For anybody who doesn't, it's a method that starts with outcomes, not credentials. And instead of screening for skills and pedigree, it defines what success looks like. You absolutely launched me into thinking differently about recruiting, and I should have looked it up before we got in here. When did you start performance-based hiring?
I would say performance-based hiring started my first search project. We might get into the history. I took my first assignment was in 1978. And the day before I became a recruiter, I was running a factory with 300 people in it. And I just didn't like the corporate politics. I actually gave my notice 6 months earlier. I said, I'll turn around the factory. I want my bonus and I'm leaving. And they tried to keep me, but I left anyway. I just didn't like the corporate politics. And my first search assignment was for plant manager. And quite frankly, it seemed obvious. Manager, and literally the president of the company, whom I knew, had a company building automotive products. And I was out there. And he said, I'm looking for a plant manager. And I said, okay, what are you looking for? And he gave me a job description, 10 years of this, 5 years of that, have to have engineering degree, all the typical stuff. And not being an HR person, I said, that's stupid. This is not a job description. A job is stuff that people do. What you've defined is a person doing job. Let's forget the person and let's define the work. And he said, wow, that's kind of odd. I said, it doesn't seem odd to me. And he said, I got to have someone turn around the factory. I said, fine, let's walk through the factory. Spent 2 hours, found 6 or 7 things to turn around. And I found somebody who can do that work. I said, don't tell me. I said, I will not compromise on the work. I don't know if the person needs 5 years or 20 years. I don't know if the person needs to be outgoing or not. All I do know is the person has to turn around a factory, and he probably turned around a similar factory in the past. I'll find a person who can do that. I have never used the job description since then that lists skills. I always say, what does a person need to do? And I've probably done it 3,000 times in the last, well, that was 1978. So we're talking, I don't want to say, is that 50 years? It seems like it's a long time ago. So I without my calculator, I can't figure that out. But I did it the other day with people building models for large scale construction projects. What do they do that makes them successful? And it's not the skills, it's what they do with their skills, their attitude, and all that stuff. So that's how I started.
You built on that with your book, Hire with Your Head, which is now the standard, I think, and standard reading for leaders who want to hire with fewer regrets. And I think the bottom line for me, learning from you over these years is that excellence is predictable and that trust follows behavior and that hiring improves when leaders stop guessing what good looks like and starts defining it. And all of these are topics that, Jackson and I have talked about in our first 100 episodes. And I think that's why we're so excited to have you here.
Well, I'm happy to be here. But I will say the practicality of it, that sounds logical. What does a person need to do? But to figure out if a person has done that and to get a hiring manager to define that, that's where the rubber hits the road. It sounds easy and logical, but it's hard to implement because if Jackson or you're in a hurry to hire somebody, no, as long as he's got 10 years of this, and I'll know him when I see him. I mean, that's the reality hits the roads. Implementing that methodology is where the challenge is. I think AI can do a better job than it had been, but it's still a challenge. I, as a recruiter, could do it because I controlled the process and my income was on it. And I took it more seriously than hiring managers, which I find interesting. They just want to get the job filled and they'll live with the consequences. So I think there's a lot that goes between the idea and the implementation and success. And I think that's really a key issue that needs to be addressed.
You heard Jackson and I, as we kind of do the setup every time we do a podcast, you heard us talk about recruiting being broken. And we want to throw that question to you. Is it broken as a system, or are we using or trying to run a 20th century hiring system in agentic AI accelerated labor market?
Yeah, I think agentic, I don't think HR actually knows what AI is and what agentic is. I think it's a way, I think it's what AI can do for you, not the fact that it's agentic. Who cares? So I would, and I think Jackson said it at the opening, is doing the wrong thing faster is stupid. It's like, if it's like, so I have a background in manufacturing and you're making parts, widget parts. If you were in manufacturing and you produced bad widgets, any factory person would say, stop producing bad widgets. But in HR, we don't do that. You say, do you have any more bad candidates I can interview? Do you have any more? Let's do that faster. I mean, so my mind is what HR should do is throw away existing hiring process and build it from scratch. And they wouldn't do anything they're doing now. They wouldn't post boring jobs. They wouldn't use agentic AI. They wouldn't build skills-based job descriptions. They wouldn't listen to every leader and follow the leader like little minions going after everybody else. They would say, let's redesign the system. So I just wrote an article over the weekend called Kanban for Hiring. Kanban is, Jackson, if you have manufacturing background, it's a pull-through system. And you look at how good people get hired is, I placed a lot of good people, hundreds, more than hundreds, a lot of hundreds. And the only way I placed them is I got to know them before I replaced them. I spent time building deep networks. And then I said, okay, I know Jackson. I've known Jackson for 2 to 3 years. I think he could handle his VP level job. So when I presented him, I wanted my client to spend a lot of time with the candidate to get to know him. So it's number one, you have to know the job. You have to know the person. You have to understand what's driving that person, what's driving that company. And I think that's where AI can do that now. It couldn't do it before AI. That, what I just described, is very, very labor intensive. You can do 90% of that with AI, and it's not agentic AI. It's real AI, redesigning the entire system and getting to know the job and getting to know the person and getting to know the situation and bring it all together. That, to me, is how AI should be used.
Yeah, and even as we pull back from that a little bit, one of the conversations I have regularly with the CHROs I coach and companies that I've supported is like, what are our ramp up expectations? And, do you expect a person in this role to be able to hit the ground running in 6 weeks or 6 months? Well, the answer to that very question changes the depth with which you're trying to go after. It changes how you think about compensation. It changes how you think about the onboarding experience for that person. And it probably should change how quickly you make a change once you realize that you've made an error. If I'm hiring someone with a 6-week ramp up, I'm going to lean into someone who has done this before at scale. If I'm looking for someone who I can grow over a couple of year period into that role, which I don't know how many people do that anymore, but that used to be a thing. Then we find ourselves in a position of the specific experiences are less important, but the learning agility and the ability to apply learnings become even more important. In your experience, like, how important is the definition of role clarity in step one in chain of events, and how do you help us and our listeners think about the way to do that more effectively? Because to your point, it sounds easy, it's really important, but it's pretty hard to achieve at scale.
Well, I think your point is exactly right on about experience. So I remember I had the luck, and pure random luck. My neighbor introduced me to business groups called YPO, Young Presidents, and Vistage, and he said, why don't you present at YPO? So I'm presenting to CEOs that had companies from 25 million to a billion. And I'm in the audience like and all I was trying to do is get recruiting. But somebody said, well, how much experience does a person need to have for this job? I said, I don't know, enough to do the work. I said, well, you got to tell me what the work is. And then I'll tell you how much experience. And they said, it doesn't matter. They have to have enough experience to do the work. A dumb person needs lots. A smart person needs less. So I tend to have this New York approach, as you probably can tell pretty quickly. I grew up in the Bronx, so I actually got kicked out of the Bronx. So it'll tell you how bad I was. If you get kicked out of the Bronx, you got to be pretty wild, crazy. Nonetheless, so now go back to your point, Jackson, about how much so exactly, if someone's got to come in and turn around a factory right away, well, they better have great experience doing that right away. On the other hand, if they can learn and develop and learn a new market, well, then they have a learning curve. But I think the point is the experience, the depth of experience depends on the job itself and the criticality of that job. So I would say, in your point being, hey, if you've got something where you got to ramp up and get going right away, no, I think from day one, they better be able to do it. And they probably should start before they learn that, before they get in the game on day one. On the other hand, if it's a learning experience, you're trying to train someone entry-level job. Well, they got time to learn and develop. Totally different kind of job. But they have enough experience to do the work would be my summary.
Well, I wanted to see if we could pick your brain a little bit on this, on the single truth about recruiting, because I think you opened up something really so bloody simple, and yet most companies don't do it. And Scott and I have talked about this before, Lou. There's a lot of data that says the activity based versus the outcome based has a different dopamine response, which then kind of leads us all into the simpler, more tangible, short term thing, and that's exactly opposite of what we should be doing from I think our view, and it sounds like yours as well. But is there like a single truth about recruiting that you can point to that is so obvious to most people, and yet we don't do it if it's not that?
Yeah, I'd say there's two. So let's assume Jackson is the client, Morris is the candidate. I would say never do this before you make an offer. Irrespective of this is the single point of truth. I'm making an offer to a candidate, and I say, are you aware of forget the money for a minute. We're going to make you an offer. Forget it'll be a competitive offer, but forget it. Why do you want this job? Why does this job represent a career move? And if you can't explain the work that you're doing, who you're doing it with, why our company makes success, the resources you're going to get, how you're going to plan it, why it's successful, and why it's intrinsically motivating to you, I wouldn't make the offer, because that's going to be problematic if the person will be successful. Conversely, I'm going to ask the hiring manager, you want to hire this candidate? Why? Does the candidate aware of the performance expectations of this job? And if so, why do you think this person's qualified to do that work? So the single point of truth is job clarity. If the candidate doesn't know it, and it's not just knowing the performance objectives, is, okay, what's the plan? What are the resources? How much time do I have? Who are the people on the team? How much flexibility do I have to build the team and make it happen? If the candidate doesn't know that, it's random luck if they'll be good or not. You might be a smart person. Let's say this, I loved the job. When I was running a manufacturing facility, it was a division, 300 people. I was 31 years old. I loved it. I hated the group president. When he came down, he said what a miserable SOB I was. So I said, you're not coming down to my plant anymore. I know I'm better than you. And I was better than him. And I knew, and then the CEO of the company said, Lou, don't leave. We'll get rid of him. He said, you're going to get his job in 5 years. I didn't want I couldn't deal with him day to day. So the point is, sometimes the situation is, even though you know it, the situation is bad, you can't deal with it. So all of those variables they're hard to sometimes measure in an interview. The ability to do the work is actually the easiest part to measure in an interview. Understanding performance objectives is pretty easy. Putting all that together, boy, that takes a lot of time. So I don't know if it's a single point of truth, but it's clarity around the real role and the circumstances. But the way you test it is, Jackson, why do you want this job? Forget the money, why do you want it? And if you can't describe it clearly, it's probably rolling the dice.
Well, and one of the things that facilitates that, and I believe that strongly because it's what we help create at Propulsion AI, is if you're focused on outcomes rather than tasks, it's an awful lot easier to hear the answer that the candidate's going to give you in that situation and match it to, are those connected to those things that are going to turn them on? Are they connected to the things that are going to drive the outcomes in the work that we need to get done? Lou, one of the things that I think is still true today, I hope it's becoming less true. There seems to be, I think, for a lot of CHROs, this push and pull, right? Even CHROs that want to lean into what the three of us are talking about, the lawyers are still sitting on the side saying, hey, you've got to be able to document your intent. You've got to be able to hire for the job right in front of you. And I'm excited to hear your perspective. My personal is, I think we've got to be thinking, where do they have the ability to pivot? We're going to hire them into a job today, but are they going to be able to pivot into the job we don't know that we're going to give them in the future? And if that is in fact a good train of thought, how do you advise human capital leaders to strike that kind of balance between what you've got to hire for today and the capabilities that you want to hire for tomorrow?
So let's think about the root cause of what you just said. The root cause of that problem is because HR people are compliance driven and risk averse. So they use the excuse of a lawyer. I am not compliance driven or risk averse. But in the early 90s, I was starting to make a lot of placements with performance-based hiring methodology. And CEOs of these companies, 30 to 50, 100 million, were growing. And hey, we're using all this stuff. Is it legal? So I talked to the number one labor attorney in the United States and had him read my book. The guy's name is David Goldstein at Littler Mendelson. If your HR folks know Littler Mendelson, you know they're the number one labor firm in the United States. I said, is performance-based hiring legally compliant? He said, it's not only legally compliant, it's far better than what HR people do. A skills-based job description is subjective. Where is the proof that a person needs 10 years experience? There's no proof. How do you know that? You didn't do a study. You get a smart person in 5 years, they can do that work. But if the work is build a system to accomplish task A, B, and C, and that's me talking to David Goldstein, the lawyer, he said, of course that's subjective and that's accurate. And I could defend that much easier than I can defend 10 years experience. But you have to focus on not wanting to not do something, which HR people, I got to protect the status quo. I got to do this. I can't take risk. So their general nature is risk averse. And when you're risk averse, you look for things to prove you're right. When you're risk oriented, you say, no, I'm going to look for things to prove that I'm right. And I did that. And I proved it right. And I got this white paper. I had to pay $10,000 for this white paper, read my book to justify it. And I can give everybody a copy of the white paper. But it proves my point. And then I said, what about not having people apply? What do you mean? I said, yeah, I don't want people to apply. I want people to submit an accomplishment related to the job. They said, oh, yeah, that's legal. It's called the two-step. I said, you can make the process anything you want. You don't have to follow the leader. So now I go back to your point, Scott. It's if you're risk averse, you will look things to prevent you from going forward. So you got to just say, no, I'm going to start thinking risk oriented. And this is where, and if I had to say anything, Scott, that's probably the biggest funneling block of all time. You've got HR people who are risk averse and are going to take full advantage of AI. So they're going to go down a path. They'll follow the leader. Don't make mistakes. I don't want to get challenged on it. I want to be compliance focused. And if you have that mentality, you will miss an awesome opportunity of using AI to fundamentally change how hiring is done across the world.
It's the difference between playing to win and playing not to lose. They're very different things.
Yeah, I think you got it. I think that's better said, but that's a simple. I'll steal that from you. It's a good line.
It's okay. I stole it from somebody else.
Yeah, well, good. Then I'll just have to say, I stole it from Scott, who stole it from somebody really insightful.
Yeah, I was at a conference speaking about 2 weeks ago, and the group right after me, we were talking about the difference between the AI of the future. Is it going to be an augmentation to humans or replace humans? That was the nature of the debate that we had. It was interesting and fun. I took the machine side. I lost because all the judges were human, so I think that wasn't fair. But the group right after, we got into a deep conversation with some folks from really good big box organizations about AI ethics. And just to double click on what you said, Lou, it was all about risk aversion. And none of it was talking about effective. And in the HR teams that I've led, it's been effective, efficient, defensible in that order. You have to have all three. But if you solve it in any other order, you will never get to effective. And that's got to be where we start.
Good. I like the way you think about it. It makes sense to me.
Yeah. And one of the things you've talked about in how we hire better is the article that you shared with me on the 12 universal traits, which I'd love your insights as to how did you conclude these were the right ones, and how do they work to help people be more aggressive in getting the right answer versus avoiding the wrong one?
So let me kind of just say the 12 universal traits are being proactive, seeing the big picture, understanding people, influencing people. I mean, it relates to those kinds of, they're so important. I can't call them soft skills. So to me, I don't know what they are. That's why I just said universal traits of success. They are kind of like these interpersonal traits, communication skills. We don't need to get into the specifics. But that's what they are. So I'm working with a company that does a lot of the support to large scale, huge construction projects, like these big giant data centers or big buildings or tall skyscrapers around the world. And what they use are what's called VDC modelers, the virtual design construction modelers. They build the whole building, from the infrastructure, the architectural structure, the electrical systems, everything going into it. So they build this in 3D models. You can turn them around. It's pretty cool. We're supporting them with this Kanban for hiring ideas. Hey, I think if we nurture these people, send them to a major site, rather than, they got like 35 or 40 job descriptions on their career page. They're terrible. Every job looks exactly the same except for one line. So I said, how's anybody going to know what the job is? Oh, it's clear. No, it's not clear. I'm looking at them. So I said, let's do something totally different. We'll create a group site for all of these models. So it doesn't matter what your level, a group site, you go there and you rank yourself on these 6 factors that drive success. So that's what we did, and we're starting to see candidates from that. So now I'm getting you the story. So around Thanksgiving, maybe before Thanksgiving, because we're training them, the company, how to do it. And I said, I don't want to just interview the people. I want you to interview the people. So a couple of managers went through the training, and I said, I'm going to watch you interview these candidates for these jobs that we found for you. So this is how it started. So I wasn't interviewing, but I can remember one manager, really good guy, Jesse. I said, Jesse, you're on the line now. You better not screw this interview up. And I said this before the candidate got there. So he's all nervous. So I'm just listening to the candidate and feeding him some questions to ask, but more not just observing. And that's when I realized, when you're not interviewing, you really learn a lot. Jesse was asking good questions, but I was really learning the answer because I wasn't thinking about what to ask next. And I realized this guy he was fairly good technically, but he's remarkable he said, well, when I don't know this, I do that. And when I learned this, when I couldn't figure out how to do it, I learned how to go to get this piece of information. And I'm listening to this. And I did it 3 or 4 times and said, holy, it really is these non-things. And it was also the fact that I wasn't doing the interview. I was kind of listening to the interview. And then it all came clear to me, because I've interviewed thousands of people. So all of a sudden, all these other interviews I had with other people I knew over years, I said, wow, these are the same things that an executive would have, or someone at VP sales would have, or director of operations would have. And this guy was like 2 to 3 years a techie, but I'm hearing these things. And that's when I wrote the article, based on these universal traits of success. It doesn't matter. The job is unimportant. You can figure the technical skills with a test, but it's these other things that take time to figure out. But if you don't know what you're looking for, either the end game so this was a good candidate. Was he good for that job? As I listened to it, I said, he was too light for that job. But then when we talked to Jesse afterwards, he's too light, but he's perfect for this job. So now all of a sudden you say, you're finding good people. Normally you would just reject them for he's a good person. Number one, you wouldn't even know he's a good person because he was too light for the job. And they created a job for him. And he's been there a month and a half and doing great because of these. So you just think about that situation. He was a great person who light on technical, strong. The company created a job for him. If I wasn't doing this nurturing process, they would never have seen him. So all of these pieces put together are almost redesigning a hiring system based on how good people get hired. Now, if this candidate, Joseph was known by these people, they would have said, remember Joseph? We had him. He worked for us and then he left 2 years ago. Let's bring him back. When you know people, you kind of do that intuitively. When you don't know people, you're just dealing with strangers. And it's this kind of, I think, no, let's understand how good people are hired and build a system around that. But HR will say, no, I'm risk averse. I don't want to do that. Can't do it. The law won't let us. No, the law, just get a better lawyer. If your lawyer tells you not to do it, get another lawyer. That's my judgment.
Lou, can we double click on one of these? Because you write in that same article that ownership beyond boundaries is one of the greatest predictors of success. Can you talk about why?
Well, let me kind of go back a little bit. So I remember when I started, because I did start as an engineer. I then got an MBA and it started building on things. The biggest piece of advice I ever had was from an old boss. He said, volunteer for things that were over your head. And I said, why? He said, because if you screw it up, nobody's going to care because they wouldn't expect you to be successful anyway. But if you are successful, but just the fact you volunteer is going to give you credit for being proactive. And I remember once that I got a real promotion because I was in engineering, then into finance and project and budgets and planning. Somebody said you should be a controller in VP finance, but I didn't want to do that. I wanted to get into running a division. So there was one of the divisions in the company I was working with was that I was doing the budgeting and planning for needed a director of supply chain. So I said, I want that job. So I knew the group president. He said, you don't have any background in that. He said, okay, I'll become APIC certified. And so I'm 26 or 27, maybe 27. And APIC certified was American Production Inventory Control Society. I said, if I get APIC certified, would you give me that job? He said, okay. So I go down and take a 3-day course, APIC certification, just logistics, supply chain, inventory management, aced it. And I said, okay, I aced the course. It was a week later. I want the job. He said, okay. And I took the job and turned it around. Then I became, that's a week later, 6 months later, I became the VP operations. And 6 months later, I became a general manager. And that's when that group president who got me that job, I said, I actually know what I'm doing and you don't, because you've never been at a division like this. So this is where this whole conflict arose. But so the point of, what was your point again, Scott? I think it was something to do with learning or agility or growing fast. Or
ownership beyond boundaries. Why is that the greatest predictor of success?
Well, I think it's because it shows. So the fact that I volunteered for stuff. Now, let's say this. When I first did this, I was nervous. I don't want to admit it. But after a while, you say, wow, if you stretch yourself, you discover that these things that you don't know aren't that hard. And so you screwed up a little bit. So, but if you volunteered, people expect you to screw it up, so they kind of support you. But then you gain confidence by doing that. So was I capable of running a company at 30 years old? I remember going to the chairman of this company, which was the politics part I didn't like, because I needed $3 million to turn it around. I said, I need $3 million. How to do it? I knew I could pull it off. And I went to the chairman and I pulled it off. And this is where, but you gain this confidence. So it's this like stair steps of gaining confidence to do these things where you learn that you're willing to grow and develop. Now the steps each step is 5 or 10%, but you take a couple 5 or 10% steps each year, you're pretty 30, 40% better than you were before. But if you're not willing to take those steps, you never get there. So I always ask people, where did you stretch yourself? Where did you try to take on challenges above yourself? So that was how I put those two pieces together. And people, it was not, to me, it was uncommon. Well, the people I dealt with, it wasn't uncommon, the good people. So then I just started asking other people, and you could see it. Some people were always they had that same capability and that same trait. So I always look for that traits in high achievers, and it's always there. 100% of the time, it's always there. You have to, how could you get there if it wasn't there?
The problems don't stay in their lane. The people need to get out of their lanes too.
Right. And you got to say, okay, I'm willing to challenge. This is why you look at HR. They're not willing to push the envelope or make that challenge. They're willing to play it safe.
Yeah, I was on stage at a conference about 3 or 4 months ago now, and the question came, what is it that we need to be doing differently to drive the function forward? My answer was, we need to spend less time worrying about experience and more time learning about learning agility. And you could tell there were distinctly two different groups in the audience. And there was the audience that got the joke and said, heck yeah. And then there was the group that thought I had just called their baby ugly. And but in reality, if you are thinking about experience, what you're really solving for is, can I solve yesterday's problems? That doesn't necessarily translate into, can I solve tomorrow's problems, right, Lou?
Yeah, I would say, so I 100% agree, but the way I would get it might be different. By me asking about, hey, Jackson, tell me about an accomplishment you took on that was over your head. And the fact that, and how'd you get that accomplishment? Why were you chosen? Did you volunteer or did someone else? What skills did you use on that job? What skills did you learn on that job? How did you apply those skills? So I'm combining not just the ability to volunteer and take on something over your head, but also how did you learn? How did you take all of these things to achieve that objective? So it's not just the learning agility as one objective, which is not, or one trait, which is critical. It's, did you actually accomplish something with that learning agility, or you just learn for learning's sake? So it's a combination of looking at that accomplishment and looking at all the traits and factors that led to you being successful in that. That would be the difference. And then I look at the trend of accomplishments over time. And I say, wow, Jackson's accomplishments keep on increasing. So it's a pretty cool guy. He's done it. And when I start looking at it, I see these universal traits pop up. You couldn't have got there without him.
Well, I keep wanting to go back to the story about my first engineering job, where I was at the Boeing company. I show up on day one, and my boss shows up 2 hours late and says, "We don't know why we hired you. We're in layoff mode." And the only way I could keep my job is to volunteer for stuff I didn't know. And
Yeah.
one of the things they came out and said, hey, we need someone with strong Excel background because we need to come up with a skills inventory for all of the shifting of about 30,000 people across divisions. Does anyone know how to model in Excel? And I said, I do. I had never used Excel before in my life, but I did believe I'd used CHRO Pro enough. I'd been an accountant as an undergraduate.
Yeah.
I figured I could just get in there and could play with stuff. And I kept doing that. Next thing you know, I was the modeling guy, and it kept me from 2 layers of layoffs. I ended up winning a 777 award for the work, and got to meet one of several Boeing executives that later got moved out of the organization for bad behavior. But at least in the moment, it worked well. But that very thing that I saw in myself, I have always looked for in other people, because again, it is the way that you can predict, maybe without the dishonesty that I included, a way to say how adaptable are they going to be in there.
Yeah, I think you hit it on. That's exactly 100% correct. Exactly.
Yeah. So how does this method help us to dive deeper? Because I think your interviewing approach talks about going 5 or 6 layers down. And what normal people in HR do is they will ask the same series of questions. They will spend 30 minutes and they will review it based on an activity-based job description. And at the very end of it, they'll use the thumbs up, thumbs down as this Delphi oracle of whether we should hire someone or not. And your approach takes all of that and puts it on the side. So why do you think that your method reveals behaviors more effectively than the way we do it more conventionally?
So let me kind of start somewhere in the middle of all of this. Over the years, I developed a scorecard called the Quality of Hire Talent Scorecard. But it's based on so I am an engineer, mathematics background, and similar kind of stuff. But I was doing PhD math level stuff as an undergrad. I just love that. Why I became an engineer, I don't know. I didn't love it enough, but I did. So as I was thinking about, and my background is a systems engineer, so so I started putting all these pieces together and interviewing candidates. And early on, one of my clients, and I'm going to say it was in the mid 80s, I was a recruiter, and he said, Lou, I like your performance-based approach. If you give us a year guarantee, I'll give you all our business. I said, a year guarantee? I can't do that. He said, come on, what's good? Think about all the people you've placed. How many in the last year? And it was very few. I mean, 20% or more, or 80% lasted a year. He said, give us a guarantee and I'll give you all the business. So I bit the bullet and did it. And I realized after a few years that when you're looking to make sure that the hire is successful over the course of a year, you look for different things. So your point, Jackson, was I wasn't looking at stuff to hire the person. I was looking for stuff to be successful over the year. So that was step one. I took a longer term point of view. I said, what does it take for this person to be successful over the course of a year? So then I started, after we did it, we actually, after 10 years, we tracked all the placements we made. With about 3 or 4 of us, we made about 980 placements. And only 75 of those didn't make it the full year. This was 8%. Wasn't, but of the 8%, most of them didn't make it because they didn't like the hiring manager. Same as me. I loved the work. I just didn't like the manager. And I just said, I'm not going to deal with this crap anymore. So I quit. I was actually thinking I was going to get another job if my recruiting thing didn't work out. So, but after doing it, we started really studying what does it take to be there for a year? And then we created the hiring formula for success. And I think it's written in the second book. I didn't probably have it in the first book. The hiring formula for success says the ability to do the work in relationship to fit drives success. And because fit is so important, it drives motivation. And because motivation is related to fit, we have to raise it to the power of N. So the formula, restating the formula more clearly, the ability to do the work in relationship to fit drives motivation. And because motivation is so important, we raise it to the power of N. Ability is actually easy to figure out. Ability is the hard and the soft skills. Motivation and the fit factors are hard. Do I want to do this work? Do I want to work with that manager? Do I want to work in that culture? Do I have the circumstances mapped to what I can do? But if you can solve N is the secret sauce and all of that stuff. How do you solve for N? So now you get into the interview. I'm solving for N, which is the fit factors. Is this candidate motivated to do that work in this environment with that manager, with that set of resources, with that team, with our culture, with our politics, with our pace? So now our interview question is, let me dig into your accomplishments related to the work. But I'm always thinking, what was the fit like? What was the circumstances like, Scott? What was your manager like? Did he support you, not support you? What was the pace like? Did you have the resources? Where did you get motivated? So then at the end of the interview, we said, okay, now let's take this scorecard, which takes that formula, and let's solve for N. Tell us why this candidate's intrinsically motivated to do the work, not just competent. Why is that person motivated to do this work? Oh, I heard this, I heard that. Okay, so you worry about team skills. You worry about engineering skills. You worry about fit factors. You worry about managerial. Can it work? So we divide, we dig deep into accomplishments, but we divide the focus. You're going to focus on technical. You're going to focus on team. You're going to focus on environment. You're going to focus on this, but you dig in accomplishments. Collectively, we'll bring all that evidence back in the interview and decide if we should go forward or not. So we divide and conquer, focus on the same thing, but we're solving that formula for the hiring formula for success. And when you do, it's just magic. When you can get managers in a room and share evidence, the light goes on. Yeah, this person's good. We spend more time with fewer people, and because we're hiring people we've been nurturing for the last 3 to 6 months for the plan, we can, and that's what I call Kanban for hiring. But it also, I mean, it's not, let's say this, it couldn't have been done. I mean, conceptually, we could do it pre-AI. It can actually be done now with AI. It's still a lot of work, but it's actually not a lot of work. I mean, AI does the lifting. It's not agentic. It's better, redesigning work. And I think thinking agentic is the key. That's just the thing. And it's not the best thing. AI does a lot more than agentic. It redesigns your whole workflow system.
That's awesome, Lou, because again, I've always wondered why it is that when we hire people, it's the only time that we look at a cash flow that may be going out $100,000 to $500,000 a year for ideally 10 years. And we do all of that assessment based upon whether we like the person or not, and whether they can do a job that we have, poorly defined. So for everyone listening, what Lou just said is how we ought to be thinking about redesigning the entire process. And so with that, this is the part of the pod where we try to get really practical for our listeners. So Lou, I guess we'd ask you the question, what are the 3 plays that a CHRO should run starting like next week that would create the biggest lift in their recruiting impact?
I'm going to give you 2 because I just told it to the president of a company the other day. She said, how do we implement performance-based hiring at my company? And I said, 2 things you got to do. Do not approve a requisition unless it's written with a series of performance objectives. And the question starts as, what does this person need to do to be considered successful? Have a minimum of 4 or 5 performance objectives, KPOs, key performance objectives, that define the task, the action, the result, and some metric of success. Do not approve a single rec until that is done. Number 2, do not let the hiring team hire anybody or approve a hire unless they complete the quality of hire talent scorecard, which defines that hiring formula for success. Ability to do the work, hard and soft skills, and the fit factor, and everybody agrees to N. Collectively have the hiring team provide evidence that this candidate meets that criteria. You do those things, you will be successful. People will start saying, well, how do you do this? Well, you got to teach them. But say until you learn how to do it, you're not going to get your rec approved. And until the team comes together and shares their evidence, you're not going to do the hire. So you get those 2 bookends. They'll figure it out. They're smart people. If they can't figure it out, they get other people who will figure it out. But they will figure it out. And it's as simply as that. Now, we have tools to do that and training to do that. But if they do that, you're in the game. But you got to bookend the process with the right criteria, not just put Band-Aids on a bad process and expect it to be successful. You can figure out the 3rd one for yourself.
Well, I think it is all about taking the time necessary to invest in making the right decision. I think a lot of time we will spend hours upon hours and have lots of reviews if we're going to spend $1 million on a piece of capital equipment. And then we will spend half an hour having a impromptu discussion with limited playbook steps to make a similar sized investment in a person. The difference is a person has much more variability. It is a walking independent variable where generally speaking, if you're buying a piece of capital equipment, you have a pretty good understanding of your upper lower control limits of where these things are going to go. So I would add that as my third.
Just to give you some background, my first management job, first whether as a manager, was manager of capital budgeting at a big automotive facility in Michigan. So that was how I got transferred from Southern California to Michigan. We'll make you a manager of capital budgeting. So I had to implement a total capital budgeting system for a multi-billion-dollar operation that didn't have one. That's what was part of my background also. Say, hey, this is like capital investment. You got to treat it as an investment, not as an expense.
It is. And your talk earlier today about moving people into the role that fits them, not necessarily the one you're looking for there, is part of portfolio capital, human capital allocation, which we've talked about.
That's exactly that, right? Yeah.
All right, senior leaders, this is where we talk about your Talent Sherpa summary, or as Scott always says, hiring for tomorrow is always harder than hiring for yesterday because tomorrow isn't here yet. Take it away, Scott.
I literally have never said that one, but I think I will. I also don't know how I follow a summary on the heels of what the two of you just said and have it mean anything. So I'm going to tell you this. Earlier in the pod, Lou was talking about getting kicked out of the Bronx. I just want to point out the thing that maybe everybody missed. Long before Survivor, he got voted off the island. Here's my summary. Salary is an investment. And we've got to think about it in terms of an investment. When you're going to hire somebody, we need to understand what are the outcomes they need to produce. What are the abilities that are going to let them produce those outcomes? How have they demonstrated those abilities in the past, and why? The fit factor. Are they motivated to do the work? Are they excited about solving the problems that you've defined? And do they have the ability to move beyond just those particular problems? And so it's not the typical summary that we do here, but I think that's on the heels of your comments. That's the best I do on a summary. Lou, what did I miss?
No, I think you hit it. So let me just say, how do you do what you just said? I think it's exactly right. The idea is, and you said, are they intrinsically or excited about that job? So this is where I don't care if someone's excited to come into the interview. Couldn't care less. They don't know the job. How can you be excited if you don't know the job? It's like, why would you be excited? So it's phony excitement. On the other hand, when you hear the excitement, when I ask the question, hey, Scott, forget the money. Why do you want this job? And I hear that excitement because I'm going to build a team to do A, B, and C, and they're going to do it in this way, and I want to work here. That means you truly are excited to do it. And I asked the hiring manager, why is this person competent and motivated? And they describe the exact same thing. Then I know you've made the right hiring decision. But that's how you encapsulate it all in the end game before you make the offer, because it all comes together there. And if you can't hear that excitement and don't see it, and it's excitement to do the work, not excitement to get the job. So I think you hit it a grand slam there, or hit it out of the ballpark.
That's outstanding. And my key takeaway is every hire is in fact a capital allocation decision. We need to treat it that way. So thank you so much to everyone that's listening in and tuning into the Talent Sherpa podcast. This is, as you remember, where senior leaders come to rethink how human capital really works. You know, they say you should never meet your heroes, but I can tell you that I got a chance to meet one of mine today, and it has been an absolute joy. Thank you so much, Lou, for joining us. I really appreciate
that. I really appreciate those comments.
Where can our listeners follow your work?
Well, I would go to performancebasedhiring.com, and you can track with me or find me. You could go to LinkedIn, and I don't think I have any space for connections. LinkedIn limits the number of connections you have, but I certainly have 4 or 5 newsletters on LinkedIn. The most important one, and I think this is going to be groundbreaking, is Kanban for hiring. It's going to change the nature, eliminate job postings, eliminate boring interviews, build a relationship-based hiring system where you actually hire people based on what Scott and Jackson just said. That is, in my mind, the future of hiring. And you can tell I'm pretty excited about it, but I would say don't hire any candidates who aren't as excited as I am if you're hiring for any kind of job. Then you know, and if you don't, they're going to probably be problematic or who knows, average performers. Thank you very much, guys, for inviting me. It was great fun.
Absolutely. And a quick shout out to one of our favorite listeners. Hello, Katie from Dallas. It was great talking to you today. Thank you for being a part of the Talent Sherpa community.
I said it at the top of the episode. I'll say it again. If you guys like the episode, if you like the Talent Sherpa podcast, do us a favor, hit the like button. Better yet, subscribe. That helps share the pod with others. Leave us a review on your favorite platform, whether that is Apple Podcasts, Spotify, or YouTube. Lou, I never thought when I first read performance-based hiring that I would have the opportunity to talk to you in any way, shape, or form about these concepts. You absolutely made a difference in my career and the way that I think about work. If you are a CHRO and you're wondering where to start your AI journey, don't forget to go over to Propulsion AI, www.getpropulsion.ai. We are transforming how smart companies turn hiring insights into powerful outcomes, in large part because we are bringing AI to bear on the concepts that we talked about in this podcast today.
Yeah, and if you're an emerging or a brand new CHRO ready to accelerate your impact, I'd love to work with you. We have 2 individual coaching slots that just opened up. So please head on over to mytalentsherpa.com. We have the resources there to help you navigate, elevate, and deliver results from day one.
Quick shout out to our sponsor, Dripify. You can supercharge your LinkedIn growth by going to try.dripify.com/Talent Sherpa. And the /Talent Sherpa is pretty important. Lets them know that you came through us. Both Jackson and I use Dripify. Check it out.
And again, appreciate having you here today, Lou. And until next time, everybody, keep raising the bar, keep sharpening your system view, and keep on climbing.